Hi there, my name is Ian Collins. I'm recording this video to talk about Mercury for the folks at the Text AV conference in New York. Sorry I can't be there in person. So we are building a prototype funded in part by Google DNI of a web-based computer-assisted transcription and translation tool with some video editing features. It does speech to text and then automated computer-assisted translation and then text to speech to generate synthetic voices at time codes that line up with the original audio. And you can edit those transcripts in the browser. It's using a range of APIs from IBM Watson and from Google, and the view to adding other providers and open source tools like Caldi and Gentle. Really trying to find the best existing APIs and different bits of software and bring them together to create a single bit of software. Our tech stack is Node.js and React and Docker. I'll talk about some of the issues we've had and both the kind of implementation issues and maybe some of the wider issues. Some things we resolved, some we haven't. Some of the practical issues for implementation we've had are videos are large and videos are weirdly formatted. This is especially true when you're not working in a controlled environment. So working at the BBC, building web-based video tools, if we had an unpleasant user experience, if someone had experience and wasn't really working for them, we could go and see what it was. And it might be that the video they'd had was particularly large. It might be that it was the time of day it was being transferred over the local network, which should be really fast, but actually can be quite congested if people are rushing to do a lot of videos for an afternoon bulletin. But we can manage that experience. Out in the wild, we can advise people what the right formats to use. Try MPEG-4 video and uploading that, and it should be about this kind of size, and it might take you a couple of minutes to upload a file of a certain length. But in practice, people are doing things like uploading raw video files that are over a gigabyte for 30 minutes. Really weird encoding options on some of those files too. So it's hard to predict. We think maybe this leads us to, do we want to consider some kind of desktop application? We could manage the experience better by shifting some of the work to the client rather than trying to do it all in the client, like for example pre-encoding and background uploading. But that's an issue specific to kind of our environment. And having to support a wide range of users depends if you're building a mass market product or if you're building one specific for your organization or a private instance that you might host. We've also had cloud provider unreliability issues like problems deploying. That's instances getting stuck, that kind of thing. We've also had unpredictability with cloud providers. So Google is very reliable, but we've used Google Drive to host videos. So individuals, when you sign in with your Google account, it uses your Google Drive space to host your videos. So we don't have the burden of that hosting cost, which makes it much more affordable. Unfortunately, there are known and unknown quota limits that you're going to reach. There are known limits that are daily and hourly quota limits. There are also application-wide limits we hadn't seen, which are currently causing a bit of an outage, which is it's just really slow to transfer data beyond a certain point, and these aren't documented, and that's a problem. We may have to reevaluate our use of Google Drive actually. But these are things again you may not encounter if you're just using S3 hosting, for example, where you get what you pay for. Even better if you have a system with a SSD or network attached storage on your private network, then implementation becomes a lot easier in dealing with large files. So those are kind of the implementation issues. So moving on from that, what are some of the perhaps more interesting issues that are applicable to everybody? So related to transcripts, well, that's probably the area we've most thought around, and it's perhaps the area most interesting to people at the conference. Issues we've wrestled with include timestamp formats. It's probably worthwhile having millisecond timing, but those of you who've done implementation work will be aware that in browser resolution is per second at best. You can do per frame to an extent. Most libraries like Popcorn.js, for example, that kind of thing, they offer per second timing in and out for timestamps, but there's discussion about should we be using something like VTT timestamp format. There's a slightly different format in SRT, but it's pretty much the same. Resolution is just a slight. Which format do we pick? There's obviously duration format, which is nice as standard, but I don't necessarily think we want to use that. It's not the easiest format to work with. It's probably quicker to work with because you've got to convert that to a usable thing often in real time in some kind of front end. So it's a consideration of the processing time for these things. And it adds up if you have a long script. There's also things like what kind of properties do we want to have on a per line basis. So let's say we have an array of lines of dialogue and they're all objects. Things to consider are scene metadata. So have text and you have closed captions, but additionally you might want to have metadata that you use, like where's the scene shot. Do you want to have blocks of scene metadata to locate different cuts and edits to make that easier to work with? Do you want to have information about speakers? Now, if you're doing text to speech, you'd want to have that. So do you have IDs that then are able to go back to URIs that uniquely identify someone in a way that you can use and reference and find all the places where this person spoke in future? So do you want to build that into your raw transcript format? And I think maybe yes is the answer to that. But exactly what that should look like is very much to a debate. Other information might be like, when you're considering, do you want to include gender information? For example, do you want to have a male voice or a female voice at this point? This may be an obvious thing to include if you're translating a news piece where you have two newsreaders, a male newsreader and a female newsreader. However, it's important to consider how the information might be used and what is the scope of that information. Is that gender information, for example, telling you about the person, or is it telling you about the voice that they should use? Because how people identify may be different to the purpose for which you're storing that information. Your intent, maybe you want to pick a male voice in that particular language or a female voice in that particular language. That may or may not be a neutral voice, for example. Someone may identify as neutral and would prefer to be a neutral representation was used, but that may or may not exist. So how you use that information is important. Perhaps particularly if you are supporting a wide range of different speakers, and it's, for example, more than just a known presenter, whether you're running interviews or not, whether you're interviewing people, or having transcripts that have members of the public, for example, who you might not be able to know how they would like to be identified. There are also issues of do you want to have per line language identifiers? It's very well to have a language on the transcript, and that can be a broad language definition like EN, or a more specific one like ENGB or ENUS. But there are many instances where there are different languages spoken in transcripts. Sometimes you don't want to translate those. You would prefer to hear the speaker's original voice. Let them speak if you're in English, but you're interviewing someone in Spanish. Let them use their voice and use subtitles. Other times, someone creating content may prefer to dub that voice over. It depends perhaps how much emotion they think there is in the original delivery. how impactful that is. They may make a choice about that, or they may not have a choice. They may not have someone who can dub that at the time, so they have to just rely on subtitles. Another issue with transcripts was, do we want GUIDs per lines? It's great to have GUID on a transcript. Obviously, you want some kind of ID, but per line granularity can be useful both for using with linked data, but also, for example, you want to extract a quote. But it can make it much easier to work within an application if you could definitively refer to a line. Because of line reordering, you might not be able to know that a line is always, line 12 is always line 12. Line 12 maybe get moved around, it may become line 13 or line 14 if there are breaks inserted. It's a lot easier to build an application that behaves predictably if you do have a unique identifier GUID per line. So that's something to consider. So, moving on from transcripts, what other issues? APIs, of course, all being different. For text-to-speech, speech-to-text, translation, how the encoding works. We've also had to abstract these for our own programs. We support different translation engines and transcription engines, and they all behave very differently. You never know if entities are going to be encoded or not. Some translation engines strip characters from the original, like new lines, or they change how they're represented. So that's certainly an issue too, and often not well documented, kind of trial and error. You get a lot of that. So it would be nice to have things that could abstract that, libraries or services. Perhaps discuss what that should look like. At some point, it'd be nice to have a standard and for all providers to follow it. Using text-to-speech in particular, it's very different. Providers do all sorts of things like, do they return an MP3 audio file that you can play? Do they return a URL that you can then download and access content? Do you have to poll to get a response? So there's a huge disparity between different providers and how they provide, what kind of formats they accept and what kind of formats they return. So that's a bit about how we're doing. We are seeing how our prototype goes. We've run into several issues. We may look at how we can resolve those and whether that's a different kind of solution. Do we have a desktop application-based solution rather than a web-based solution? Do we move away from Google Drive to a private storage solution? That the kind of things. I'm happy to talk to any of you after the event. I hope that's been kind of interesting a bit and insightful. If you have any questions about our work, do check us out at Glitch Digital on Twitter. My name is Ian Collins. You can find a link to our blog from our website at glitch.digital. We've got a video of a prototype in action. We've got some source for that as well, some source code on GitHub for the prototype we built quickly in about 4 days, just before we got to this stage. That should show the translation and transcription and audio dubbing in action. If you'd like to get in touch, please do, and have a good time at the conference.